sure I don't need to tell most of you, just to talk a little bit about the day, that 1 billion people around the world have some form of disability. And I was musing with some colleagues this morning and saying, what would it look like if you could get those 1 billion people into your site at the same time? Could you imagine the diversity of cultures and colours and socioeconomic scales and just the different range of people that would be in that space? Because disability it cuts across everything. It cuts across every culture, every race, every religion, and it's something that really impacts all walks of life and all types of people. So it's brilliant that we can reflect on that today and reflect on the contribution that people with a disability make in our society from a diverse perspective, that's for sure. No one size fits all here. Today, the theme for International Day with Disability is challenge the way you think about disability and see the ability in disability. And I want to challenge that on a global perspective as well, and think about what people across the board offer our communities and our societies. I think that's important. We focus on the empowerment of persons with disabilities for inclusive, equitable, sustainable development, as is outlined in the 2030 agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's important that people with disability are well recognised in that space moving forward. It's time to celebrate achievements and contributions of this vibrant community, as well as increase public awareness, understanding and the acceptance of people with disability. The day is celebrated today for sure, but there are events in the lead up and there are events after the day as well. If you're interested to find out about other events in the area, you can certainly look on Laura's AAA Play website. That'll give you some more information about other events if you want to figure out some other things. So how we're going to run the format of the panel today, I'm going to introduce each panel member, starting with Frances in a minute, and then she's going to give a 5 to 10 minute presentation on her work and what she's done. I was privileged to have a conversation with Frances the other day about some of her work, and I think you'll find it interesting and insightful for those of you who haven't heard of it. Those of you who have, I'm sure you will enjoy the deeper insight into what she's been doing. After Frances, I'll introduce David Moody, and then after David, I'll introduce Julia, who I also spoke to for the first time just the other day. David I've known previously. Hello, David. From my work at Melbourne City Mission. We've done a few bits and pieces together there. So Frances Riggs works for the Latrobe Community Health Service, an NDIS partner in the community in Sydney, Melbourne and regional Victoria. Certainly been on the Grow That organisation since the start of the NDIS. As a senior community development and capacity building coordinator, Frances leads a team of people across 10 service areas who are working towards an inclusive and accessible Australia. Frances's team works alongside community organisations, mainstream service providers and businesses with the aim to create more opportunities for people with disability to participate in all aspects of community life. Frances has worked in a range of areas, including disability, health, aged care, community development, alcohol and other drugs and family violence, both overseas and here. And she joined LCHS 4.5 years ago and has worked in a range of roles, including community capacity building and local area coordination. She previously worked for the NDIA at the Barwon trial site. That's going back a few years, and I'm sure there's some interesting stories came out of that time. I know I was at Melbourne City Mission during the trial site stage, and we put a space, an office in Barwon to test it out, and that was an exciting time for us all. Frances is excited to be part of delivering the social reform that is the NDIS. She's passionate about undertaking and supporting activities that build the capacity of the community to be more accessible to and inclusive of people with disabilities. Frances would love to see increased opportunity for people with disabilities to build their capabilities and meaningfully participate in and contribute in the community as valuable citizens. And I believe, Frances, you're going to tell us about one of those programs now. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you, Frances.
Thanks, Dave. Hi everyone, lovely to join you all today to celebrate International Day of People with Disability. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge people with a disability with lived experience, their family, friends and carers for the contributions they make to our society. Our world benefits hugely from the contributions and the innovations people with a disability make every day. Now I'm going to share my screen with you, and it looks like the host has disabled participant screen sharing because I've got a few slides. Can you help me out, Laura?
Yeah, I'm just screen sharing. Oh, where? Okay, you should be right now.
Thank you. Good, good. Is that slide coming through okay? Great, thank you. So essentially on the screen, there's a picture of the area across Victoria that Latrobe Community Health Services covers. As Dave said, we have grown exponentially. Latrobe Community Health Service has merged with Link, and Link historically has early childhood, early intervention contracts. So Latrobe Community Health Services is combined between local area coordination services and early childhood, early intervention services. So you can see we do cover, it's all of those green and light green, all different shades, quite a bulk of Victoria. So it's the dark blue that we don't cover. So I won't bore you and read out all of those. You can see all of those names. Essentially, Latrobe Community Health Services merged with Link, who were delivering early childhood, early intervention in 5 service areas. You may be aware that Latrobe Community Health Services is a partner in the community, delivering the National Disability Insurance Scheme both for 0 to 6-year-olds, so that's what we call ECI, I'll just shorten it now, and 7 to 64-year-olds, so that's LAC, or Local Area Coordination Service. So quote, most prominently, we're known for providing that early intervention and assistance to people with a disability, carers and families, whether eligible for the NDIS or not. To be clear from the outset, I don't work in the ECI space at all. So if anyone's got any questions around that area, I'm happy to pass those on to my manager who is involved in that aspect of our work. As part of our contract, so other than the delivery of the NDIS and that direct assistance around exploring eligibility for the scheme and developing plans and implementing plans, we're also contracted to work to build a more inclusive community across our service areas that's more inclusive and accessible for people with a disability and children with developmental delay. So you can see on that slide, there's a hyperlink there, and essentially that's a section of our website that does talk a little bit more about specifically what we are doing, and I encourage you to have a look on that to learn a bit more. So essentially, the aspect of the work that I'm going to talk about today that I was involved in was a collaboration that we undertook at the Ballarat Aquatic and Leisure Centre in collaboration with a range of stakeholders. So Ballarat Aquatic and Leisure Centre, and I'll just call it BALC now because that's a bit long-winded too, is a City of Ballarat facility. As we all know, collaboration work and community development takes time. It's certainly, we took the time to build the relationship over a year and had conversations and worked with BALC around access and inclusion in general, seeking to build engagement and trust with the centre first. And the City of Ballarat before we involved any other stakeholders to pursue this targeted initiative of the quiet sensory time for children and adults with autism. So essentially what we undertook first was we undertook some initial work with the City of Ballarat around those conversations around access and inclusion, where we wanted to know what sort of work have you already undertaken around access and inclusion, which was quite extensive. So it wasn't as if they weren't already across access and inclusion. We just wanted to extend and resource and support that further. So we worked with them and sought to identify some areas for improvement, and we invited their completion of what we we called a provider self-assessment, where, you know, we can identify some barriers and seek to resource and support some improvements in around that. So essentially the areas of outcomes initially in this work, where we were just working directly with Bulk, was that as a result, Bulk registered and became an accredited autism swim centre, and 13 instructors have completed the highest level of online training, and Sport and Recreation Victoria have offered to provide them face-to-face training to follow on from that online training as well. At the time, the Grampians Regional Communication Service was still funded, and we engaged that service, and they provided directly inclusive communication and easy English training, and they developed communication boards for Bulk. That was across both the aquatics and the gymnasium program. Then Bulk itself spent some money through the City of Ballarat and engaged a disability accessibility consultant to undertake an audit of the facility itself. So there was deep commitment from the City of Ballarat and Bulk itself. There was a few things that were identified that could be improved. So for instance, a drag mat was purchased to get people out of the pool quickly in case of an emergency, because that mechanism didn't exist before. It was agreed that the centre is located quite closely to the Ballarat Specialist School. So it was set up that some volunteer gym coaching opportunities could be offered to senior school students at the Ballarat Specialist School as an extension of their options for post-school. As we were working directly with them, we wanted to convey that needs of people in the community. So what we did at Latrobe was a survey. We wanted to build an understanding of what's required to improve access and inclusion for children and adults on the autism spectrum, their carers and families. So we were aware of the numbers of people with autism in the City of Ballarat. So we were bringing a need to the centre and seeking to identify what was possible to meet that need. So the sort of questions that we asked in that survey, what was their experience of accessing Bulk already, and what sort of areas of improvement would they be able to identify? What sort of issues did they identify that needed improvement? So straight up things like the change rooms, it was too loud, there were too many people, they thought staff could benefit from training around autism. We asked them whether they were interested in sensory sessions for people with autism, which would restrict peripheral sensory inputs such as lighting, sound and noise in the swimming and other recreational areas at Bulk. And they thought that smaller group numbers of swimming groups lessons and a consistency of teacher would be an improvement. They also suggested pictorials of how to do the exercises, whether that was in aquatics or whether that was in gymnasiums, could be developed. We also surveyed service providers, because service providers bring their clients to the centre. It's a highly used, busy public centre. So we wanted to hear their views of the same sort of questions. They too were very interested in the possibility of a sensory quiet session being developed. So after we completed the survey, Ballarat Autism Network, which is made up of 500 plus families, and Sports Central, our local regional sports assembly to Ballarat, joined the collaboration to resource and support the initiative after Bulk and the City of Ballarat accepted the need that we had demonstrated in the survey that I just outlined. So the Ballarat Autism Network shared their lived experience in all meeting processes and consultations about the development of this initiative. The City of Ballarat once again spent more resources and engaged a consultant to hold face-to-face group interviews and phone interviews with Bulk customers to find out about their experiences of accessing Bulk and its programs, and what the sensory quiet process could look like. And once again, the Ballarat Autism Network and Sports Central were involved in all of those consultations. The data from those consultations was combined with the data that we had developed in the initial survey to build a comprehensive picture of the need and inform an approach to meet those needs. So what did the sensory quiet time look like? So you can see the times of operation that were up here. So it was a pilot, and essentially what it did involve was lights being dimmed, music and announcements turned off only for emergency, would they be on? Signage was put up at the front desk and around the centre to alert customers of the sensory quiet time and verbal announcements. There was 2 group dedicated change rooms with signage set up, and there was a commitment made for consistent swimming teachers and gymnastic coaches and dedicated lane spaces to be made available. Lifeguards were provided with scripts to approach customers generating too much noise. There's a need for community education around what we were trying to do, and so that the general public were aware of that. Also, training was provided to frontline staff. Now, it wasn't just on the Quiet Sensory Time initiative, but it was about supporting information on what was available in terms of the aquatics and the gymnasium programs, and being able to message to the public and inquiries around a tailored approach could be delivered specific to that person's needs. Because as you would appreciate, everyone's sensory profile is unique, and so we had, for instance, in those surveys, heard from some people who were pretty clear they weren't going to return to the centre because they had very bad experiences of going, and how that played out for them quite negatively. So when we offered that feedback, we wanted then to reassure and build confidence and reassure that there was scope to be able to address those situations should that happen. It was also put in place an escalation process should communication fall down and not work very well. So another thing that was developed was a social story that was developed by the Ballarat Autism Network that was specifically mirrored what the centre looked like. So it mapped out from the moment someone enters the centre until they're engaged in the classes, what that looked like. So that offers some understanding, some predictability, some comfortability for the people who are potentially participating in the aquatics and the gymnasium programs. Also, visit passes were offered because there was an issue identified about standing in queues and the distress that can cause some people. So specifically, the sensory balance play was set up for 18-month to 5-year-olds in the gym. There was access available during these periods of time to a water play and a pool play group for 1 to 5-year-olds, and there was casual private swimming lessons. So what did people think of it? So we had some very positive feedback. People were able to lodge feedback either through the Rate-a-Let feedback iPad in the foyer of the centre, or via the website at Bulk, or they could lodge that feedback directly at Latrobe Community Health Services. So here's a couple of comments that were made. Thank you very much for your wonderful initiative. My son and I, along with another couple of friends, attended today. From 3 to 4, it was just wonderful, quiet, no stares, no comments, and just an all-round positive experience. My mate and I intend to bring our boys each week now, something I wouldn't have never have done before this initiative. And another comment, more relaxing for my son with so much more, less noise. Great idea. So where to from here? So clearly, because of COVID, things have been restricted around operations. The Quiet Sensory Time is not currently operational. The centre has had a change in management, and I'm having discussions with management around the resumption in time. There is a commitment for that to happen. It's just about staging the opening of the centre at this point in time. There's been a couple of things identified through the trial that could be added as improvements. So there are quotes being undertaken for adult change tables to be installed in those specific sensory quiet time change rooms. There's going to be some chimes or soothing music at the beginning and the end of the sensory quiet time. That's being investigated because the current PA system can't accommodate that. There's budget being explored, so there's a commitment to look at that, to install external blinds that can be lowered during the periods of bright conditions. And exploring whether the sensory quiet time can be held at broader times, because currently school-age children who are seeking lessons after school wouldn't be able to enter during a sensory quiet time at this point in time. And also there's an issue being identified about trying to balance the sensory quiet time with other noisy programs that do run at the busy public centre. The Ballarat Autism Network, made up of those 500 families, are front and centre at the continuous quality improvement of this initiative. So we're looking to continually improve the experience and how it's been set up through that network. So the other element of improvement is looking to extend the sensory quiet time to cover all areas of the centre. The other thing that needs to be improved is that to really put publicly that the centre is an autism accredited, Autism Swim accredited centre, because there's no signage that indicates that. So that can build some confidence for people joining the centre. So they were the slides, so I'll stop sharing. Is it still on?
Yeah, it's still on, but thank you, Francis. That was
no worries.
A fantastic introduction to the work you're doing. It sounds like a brilliant initiative, and I really hope it gets back up and running again. I have a few questions, but I'll save them till the panel and the discussion time. Our next panelist that I want to introduce is David Moody, sitting in front of the flash background there, David, NDS. David Moody is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Disability Services, which is Australia's peak body for non-government disability service providers. Prior to working at NDS, David was a lawyer in private practice, I did not know that, and a public servant leading teams responsible for national health and safety reform, strategy, OHS policy, OHS legislation, regulations, regulatory framework development, budget strategy, and corporate planning. David also led a team responsible for coordinating the Victorian government's contribution to developing and establishing the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Thanks for your work in that space. David commenced working with the NDS in 2015 as Victorian State Manager and was appointed as NDS CEO in December 2019. Thanks for joining us today, David.
No worries. Thanks very much, Dave, and thanks, Laura, and all of the good folk at Reclink Australia. It's great to be here. It's not the first time I've been to one of these events organised by Reclink, and every year they never fail to disappoint, I must say, even online. I just want to share a few thoughts with you, perhaps some personal thoughts, if I might say. I want to thank everyone for inviting me to speak at this event to celebrate the International Day of People with Disability, a day which was originally proclaimed in 1992 by the UN General Assembly Resolution 47.3. The day aims to promote the rights and wellbeing of people with disability in all spheres of society and development, and to increase awareness of the situation of people with disability in every aspect of political, social, economic and cultural life. This year, the UN called out COVID-19 and the way the pandemic is deepening pre-existing, what the UN describes as pre-existing inequalities, exposing the extent of exclusion and highlighting that work on disability inclusion is imperative. Even under normal circumstances, the UN tells us, people with disability are less likely to access healthcare, education, employment, and to participate in the community. The UN notes that an integrated approach is required to ensure that people with disability are not left behind, and this extends, of course, to Australia. So today, on the 3rd of December, when we reflect on the International Day of People with Disability, we're reminded of how far we've come as a nation, but also how much we have to do to support people with disability, working in partnership to ensure people with disability have choice and control over their lives, accessible housing, accessible public buildings, accessible public toilets, for goodness sake. The fact that we're even talking about that concept in a first world country still beggars belief in my view. And of course, access to employment with the social and economic participation that a job brings. And in keeping with the specific theme of this year's day to challenge the way you think about disability and see ability in disability, I wanted to share with you a story of my own, which I hope, illustrates the point. For about 6 of my pre-teen years, which are a long time ago now, my family would holiday in a caravan park at Safety Beach in Victoria for 6 weeks over the Christmas New Year period. When I was 11, I was really into trying to make things using Fisher technique, an electronic version of Lego. In the caravan park, there was a young man who was clearly fascinated by this electronic Lego, and it quickly became clear that he was also much better at using it than I was. I'm hopeless at anything to do with my thumbs. He was a few years older than me, but on occasion we would build things together. After one such occasion, I returned to my family's caravan only to hear a bit of a commotion outside. My older friend was being harassed and tormented by other children in the caravan park. And this was because, unbeknownst to me at the time, given my naivety, he had autism. And it was because he was different, because he didn't fit in, quote unquote. And we know that kids can be cruel, and I was so traumatised by this event, I actually raced outside and tearfully told the kids to rack off. Possibly more severely than that, but that's what I think I might have said. They eventually did, and over time I lost contact with my caravan park mate over several years. But on this International Day of People with Disability, I'm left to wonder, whatever happened to my friend? Did he grow up to realise dreams of building and making electronic gadgets in which he clearly had significant ability? Or did he suffer under the yoke of lowered expectations faced by so many people with disability at that time and never realise his dreams and ambitions? I'm hoping the former and not the latter, but we need to do more than hope for change. On this day, let's commit to seeing the ability in people with disability, and let's remember what we have to lose as a community when we don't. But let's also remind ourselves that for so many people with disability, like my young friend from the 1970s, it was that long ago, realising their aspirations to lead a great life means ensuring people with disability have the right supports, services and community in their corner. And that's why at NDS we're committed to ensuring our disability sector in Australia is supported to become world's best practice. We are not there yet. And that organisations such as Reclink, AAA Play are able to continuing what they do, providing great opportunities for people with disability around Australia. Thanks.
Thank you, David, and thanks for sharing your story. Your passion for this space is well known.
How you guys? How are you guys today?
Very good, thanks, Fadil. If you could just leave your microphone on mute while we're doing the presentations, and then we'll have a time and conversations later. Thanks, David. Your friend might have existed back in the 1970s, but I do a heck of a lot of camping with my family, and one of my good friends who I camp with a lot has a daughter with autism. The same situation I see playing out time and time again still today. And so we certainly still have a long way to go in this space, that's for sure. So thanks.
Sadly, I think you're right, Dave. Yep.
Yes, I think so. The final panelist that I'd like to introduce is Julia. Julia, thanks for being patient and waiting to be third. I had a first meet and greet and phone call with Julia last week. And here's what she says in her bio here. Julia is a geek girl, TV addict and Powerchesports athlete. She spent 9 years running a Melbourne science fiction and fantasy convention, and in 2017 co-founded and currently runs the @WeAreDisabled Twitter project. Julia started playing sport 3 years ago, rather late in life, and is the vice president of Powerchesports Victoria. When not off having adventures, she plays a lot of board games and grows vegetables to feed her bunnies. Julia, I once had an auntie who had bunnies. She was a slightly crazy auntie, and she used to give us bunny poo for Christmas. So I certainly hope you don't fall into that category.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Hi, everyone. Thank you to Laura and Dave for inviting me to speak today. Today, I am going to challenge your perception of who plays sport. I feel most of my life, I've been surrounded by sport. I was probably going to the footy before I was born because my dad played country football. And so, you know, as a newborn, still going. And then when Dad retired a few years later, Mum used to go to the football every week with her aunties to see North Melbourne play. And then my younger sister played t-ball and softball, which she still plays. And she dabbled in netball for a while too. So I've grown up watching football. I'm an NFL fan. I love Formula One. But as someone with limited mobility, there's never really been anything for me. And as exciting as the rise of the Paralympics has been, seeing it being included alongside the Olympics, it's still deeply rooted in the idea that sport is for the physically strong. I remember when I was in primary school at Glen Allen, I attended, I think there was a little athletics group they tried to get up and running. And the group I was graded in was a lot of nonverbal people who couldn't really move much. So there was never anything really competitive or interesting. And I don't really remember attending that for very long. Then in high school, I integrated into mainstream and lost contact with the disability community. And ironically, when I left Glen Allen was probably about the time electric wheelchair hockey was first being established. So out of nowhere, a few years ago, a friend happened to come across what is now the Victorian Electrical Wheelchair Sports Association, otherwise known as USA, but we rebranded last year to Powerchesports Victoria, and asked me if I knew about it. What she didn't know when she asked it, I'd actually been Googling to see if I could find a sport, having been inspired by the creation of the AFLW. So what is Powerchair sports? They're sports that have been adapted for disabled people who use power chairs for everyday mobility and are played indoor on basketball courts. Often people with little muscle strength or movement, people who would not normally be considered able to play competitive sport, people like me. Let's see, I'm going to see if I can screen share here. Okay, cool, hold on. Oops. Sorry, it's the first time I've tried to screen share on Zoom. So we currently play 2 Powerchair sports. We have Powerchair football, which is based on soccer. As you can see, the ball is quite a lot larger.
Julia, I'm not getting that on my screen share at the
Okay,
moment.
sorry. Let me see. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Sorry.
Got it. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yes. So, sorry. So that was the initial slide. So yes, Powerchair football, which is played with 4 players per side, plus some substitutes on the bench. An oversized football. The main difference with Powerchair football and soccer is we have a 2-on-1 rule. So when a player is within 3 meters of the ball, only a player from the other team can be within that 3 meter area of the ball. So you can't have 2 people from the same team, like right near the ball. So in a way, it ends up a bit like pinball, because things ricochet off a lot. There is, however, a lot of skill involved. And it's highly competitive. It's played by 29 countries around the world. And we play at national and international level as well. Australia was meant to hold the World Cup in 2021, but it's been pushed to 2022 at the moment. Yeah, as you can see, so this is a specialised sports chair, which, you know, if you're getting very competitive, you get into. The guard at the front is elongated, so you can kick the ball from the side or the front of your chair. One of the highlights of Powerchair football is the spin kick, where the chairs sort of spin almost at a 360, but get a real lot of power off the ball. Just here's another shot of sort of more general play. As you can see, we've got players who drive with chin controls as well. And for those who don't have strike forces, which are the main Powerchair things, so this is an everyday chair with a Powerchair football guard on the front. And the other major sport we play, which is also a national and international sport, is hockey. Hockey has two kinds of players, as you can see from the photo. You can have your handheld sticks, and you can have what they call a T-stick, which is attached directly to the chair. The rules are minimum 2 T-sticks on a team, and one of them usually has to be goalkeeper, which is my current position. Hockey is, so the hockey that's being played in Australia is slightly different. We're now playing international rules hockey, which is based on floorball and ice hockey. It's hard to see on that photo, but there's a plastic rink that sort of goes all the way around the playing area, and the ball is not allowed to go more than 20 centimetres off the floor. There is, and the goals are quite low, which you will see here. So that's a good shot of the goal. That's actually me. This was from the November Club Championships last year, where we came second. I'm not actually a fan of that photo because I think that's when they just scored a goal against me. So apart from that, we occasionally also play rugby league, which is probably the closest aligned to able-bodied rules. And we also play balloon soccer. Okay, sorry, how do I get out of the screen sharing?
You should be able to go back to where the screen share button, sorry, at the top of your screen, it should have that you're screen sharing, and it should have a stop button next to it at the top center of the screen.
Laura, you might just be able to take over screen sharing and then turn it off.
On it.
Anyway, so Powerchesports are one of the most inclusive. It doesn't matter what muscle strength, age or gender you are, you can play. All you need to do is jump in a chair. But we do struggle with the lack of recognition of being a legitimate sport. While disability sport is enjoying more widespread recognition and is often being integrated into able-bodied sport, Powerchair sports have been mostly absent from the spotlight. Powerchair football was knocked out early in the application process for inclusion for the 2024 Paralympics. So it doesn't look like we will see any Powerchair sports in the Paralympics until at least the 2030s. Powerchair sports are also a fantastic spectator sport. Once people have viewed it, they love it, and they keep coming back. Being able to participate in sport isn't just about being competitive. the benefits go so much deeper than that. It's physical and mental health and well-being, learning discipline and perseverance through training, being part of a team, and the social aspects of sporting clubs. These are all important parts of life that everyone should have access to. Sport is truly not inclusive until people of all physical abilities can play. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for that insight into your world. And I'm pleased you were humble enough to show us a photo of when you were getting scored against. That was fantastic to see. Appreciate that. I now have some questions for each of the panel members. We're going to skip over a few guys because we are a bit behind. But I do want to start with the first question off our list. The theme for International Day of Disability today is challenge the way you think about disability and see the ability in disability. I'm particularly interested in who you think that statement is targeting and why. So anyone can go first. I'd like to hear from each of you on this question. How about we go with David first? We're on the top left of my screen.
Challenge the way you think about it. Look, I think it's a message that that most in the Australian community could still receive and actually benefit from. I think that the fact that amongst OECD countries, it's often said we're about 21st out of 27th when it comes to the number of people with disability in employment, speaks volumes about the distance Australia still has to go to support people with disability in employment and ensure that they have access to jobs in an open employment market and other types of employment. I think that message particularly needs to be delivered to those who have responsibility for supporting or in fact teaching and supporting kids with disability in particular. I think that what we see in our schools is at best variable in terms of the quality of education that children with disability are able to access, and the assumptions which underpin a lot of that teaching and learning are very 1950s, if I might put it bluntly. The fact that in our special schools in various parts of Australia, we don't have careers teachers or careers officers, but transition officers still by title, I think speaks volumes about where that message might go most constructively. That's what I think.
So it's not just the general public, sometimes it's specialists who work in the space as well.
I think sometimes particularly those with that responsibility, yes. Yeah.
Julia, what about yourself? Who do you think that message needs to be targeted to?
Actually, I think it's targeted to both non-disabled and disabled people. Like non-disabled, it's stressing the assumption that's been ingrained by society that we don't have the ability to do much, and the lowered expectations as David was talking about earlier. But I think also it can be directed at disabled people because sometimes we get bogged down so much. We get bogged down so much with what we can't do, which is often reinforced with applying for funding and services. For example, when you apply for the NDIS, it's all about what you can't do and what you need help to do. And sometimes we forget that we can do a lot that we don't think about. And I think Laura actually mentioned it before, you can't be what you don't see.
Yeah.
So I think it applies to both, but I'm actually really conflicted about this year's theme because to me it's too close to see the ability, not the disability, and that's a problematic term from a few years ago, which is like erasure of identity, which means you're erasing issues and rights and accessibility, and it also comes from a place of assumed no ability. So I don't know how I feel about this year's theme.
Well, thanks for saying that, because it's actually one of the reasons I wanted to include this question is because I was a little uncomfortable with the theme at times myself, and I couldn't really understand why, but I think you've just nailed it there about why it was some of those associations were certainly at play in my mind. Thank you. Francis, what are your thoughts on who this theme is targeting this year, or who it should be targeting?
Yeah, I think the most significant barrier for people with a disability to full participation in all aspects of community life is the attitude. and behaviour of the community towards people with a disability. So I think the theme's targeting the general community. You know, I think, you know, we're at the moment trying to, well, we have got a campaign, a digital campaign going on at the moment that recognises the achievements and contributions of people with disability to their community via our website and Facebook. And I've just put those links in the chat if anyone's interested. You know, encourage people to view and share through their networks. For me, I think, you know, there's a big lot of work to be done about shifting the view of the community.
Yeah. In your presentation, you talked a little bit about training the staff at the pools and giving them a script on how to approach people who are making too much noise and things like that. And I wonder how this theme would play out in that context as well at times.
Yes, well, I mean, you know, I'm a user of that centre myself, and I've seen it in action. And yes, there's some disgusting things, frankly, that are said, and gestures that are undertaken and behaviour towards people with a disability. So, you know, staff have been walked through around how to respond to some of that behaviour.
Yeah, thanks. Let's focus on sport for a couple of questions, because that's what we like to do at Reclink and in AAA Play. So, Julia, I'm going to come back to you. Powerchesports Victoria is a leader in adapting sports to suit all abilities, rugby, soccer, hockey you talked about. Can you talk a little bit about what you do that other sports could implement to make people with a disability feel more comfortable getting involved in sports, in clubs and various other places?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do to make people comfortable is due to our sports being adapted for people who use power chairs, because then it's accessible for varying strength levels. Like, because power chair football in particular, it's about the skill of you driving and being able to think tactically. It doesn't, you know, you could be the strongest person in the world or, you know, hardly be able to move. As long as you can move that chair where it needs to go, you can play. And I think that's probably why it's one of the fastest growing power sports as well, because, yeah, anyone can jump in and play.
Yeah.
Also, most sports organisations don't offer any activities for people with minimal strength in power chairs. So having activities that can be adapted to different levels is really important. Otherwise, there's a whole section of the community that's feeling excluded.
It's such a cultural critique of sport, isn't it? Because sport is so often about how strong you are, as you pointed out a couple of times.
Whereas there are sports that are like snooker and like car racing, that's I mean, it's still slightly physical, but it's not as physical as say football.
Yeah, okay.
I think the other thing that makes things comfortable is having the info easy to find and quite detailed, which we've been improving ourselves. And the other thing I would say would be being affiliated with able-bodied clubs, so you're feeling included and not segregated. Most Powerchair football clubs are now affiliated with A-League or national soccer clubs. Like in Melbourne, I play for Melbourne City and we play against South Melbourne. But even then, sometimes you struggle for recognition within the clubs. We only recently got our Powerchair put on the Melbourne City website. South Melbourne, I know, get invited to club functions, which we currently don't. So it's that mix of, but we want to be included. Like if you're going to have us as part of your club, then include us.
At Reclink, we've done some work around including some of our teams within a mainstream club, not specifically people with disability, but we'd be happy to talk to you more about that, I think, offline around how you've done that, because I'd love to learn a bit more about that. Francis, I just want to throw that similar question to you. Your experience at the Aquatic Centre, what can we do in other sports that might make the activities more accessible?
Well, I think essentially it's about being really open to having conversations with people with a disability. A about what they need and what that should look like, and to not just in the co-design period, but also, you know, in the implementation, reviewing it and the evaluation and continually improving it. I think it's absolutely doable, you know, in this experience around having something that is available for everyone. There are people other than people who have autism that benefit from a sensory quiet time as well. So, you know, it doesn't need to be a disability specific program, which is often the response that I've had with people. Oh, you know, we're doing really well, we're doing a disability specific program. Now that might be important for a certain group of people and their needs, but they should still be open to the fact that you can hold programs within those facilities that are available for everyone, but still meet those people's needs, informed by that experience that's shared.
Yeah, thanks. And you've talked a bit about co-design and the Ballarat Autism Network. How important was their voice in attaining a better outcome through that process?
It was absolutely critical. Essentially, I think the members of the Ballarat Ballarat Autism Network, are really generous and patient with helping people around the table understand the diversity of their experiences. And some of them had been quite horrific, really, and traumatising. You know, so it wasn't just members of the public from which they had had poor experiences, but it was staff. So there a lot of work had to be done about trust building back with the facility. So they were very generous in stepping them through and educating them about what was required. And I think that, you know, they really stepped through and provided some really practical steps on how to address that, and were very generous in actually designing them.
Brilliant, brilliant. What a great example of co-design and best practice. Have we lost David? Is he still here? David Moody?
No, he had to head off to another engagement at 1 o'clock.
Okay, no problem. I want to, Julia, just pick up a little bit then on the impact of COVID on the landscape for people with disability. And from your personal perspective, or from people you know, how has COVID impacted on the community of people with disability?
Personally, well, I'll speak from personally first. I think there's a lot of positives that have come out of COVID. I mean, I am considered vulnerable, so I have pretty much been locked down since March.
Yeah.
I'm getting out a little bit at the moment, but not too much. But I think it's opened up a world of accessibility that disabled people have been sort of asking for years, and that, you know, everyone said was like, it's too expensive, it's not doable, but now suddenly working remotely, everyone's doing.
This type of activity?
This type of activity, concerts, like everything has just become suddenly more accessible, especially for people who are housebound. But it's also on the negative side, it's also shown a lot about how the world really thinks about disability. The fact that it's taken a worldwide pandemic to get something accessible. Like there's been pandemic and emergency plans where disabled people have been the afterthought. There's also the traumatic triaging of hospitals if they overflowed, about who would get treated and who would not.
Yep.
You know, it's something a lot of us have probably known for years, but seeing it as the reality of like, yep, you just won't get treated if they don't have enough for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was writing a letter to some key stakeholders just yesterday, and I was writing about how, you know, COVID has in some ways given a lot of us an experience of what isolation feels like for a whole lot of people, but you've really given us an example of how that takes it to the next level, haven't you?
Well, I found it very interesting. So since NDIS has come in, I have been out a lot more, but pre-NDIS, I was at home a lot. So, you know, I was used to being at home and occupying myself. So it's been really funny to watch everyone go, what is this life? When for a lot of disabled people, that's just their normal reality.
Yeah. Maybe you should be running online courses on how to entertain yourselves during COVID or something like that. Francis, from your perspective, COVID, how have the COVID restrictions impacted the flow of innovation and new initiatives, such as the Ballarat Aquatic and Lifestyle Sensory Sessions? And what advice can you give to sports wanting to try out something new?
Look, I think that unfortunately, it's had to be on hold because the centre hasn't been able to be open to take patrons. So, there is a commitment for it to resume in time, and we'll work on that. But I think I would encourage sports to innovate. I think, which I know that they probably already do, but essentially, as Julia's saying, that during COVID there's been a requirement to do that. Really, you haven't been able to do things as you ordinarily do, and I think that there, in our experience, we can have seen that people have had increased access where they haven't been able to have access previously. So whether that's, in online options, home delivery, telehealth, more space in shops and cafes, are just some of the ways that they've adapted, and that's made a really significant difference. So we'd really urge businesses and other organisations to keep those practices around for good. We had another campaign that was online that was called Welcome to My World. I mean, because essentially, yes, most people with disability have had significant isolation experiences, and so people who don't have a disability are experiencing through COVID what that has been like for them, and it's just building awareness once again. You can all make a difference in improving access and inclusion. We encourage you to take action.
Yeah. And then just before my final question, Francis, I'm really keen to ask you, you were in the NDIS from the Barwon trial site and obviously involved in disability before that. What's been your experience of the NDIS as it's developed over time to where it is today?
I think, I've seen, I'm sure that people will say, their experience has been different, but I have seen significant impact on the difference that the NDIS has made to people's lives, where, they can live more a life of their choosing as opposed to previously without having those options and supports. And I think, I've seen improvements based on that direct feedback from people with disability, carers and families, and the disability sector, and that's been rigorous as it should be, and I can see that as reform as it is, it will continue to improve based on that shared commitment to continue to input into it to improve it.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how this experience of COVID that you've both now spoken to will further shape what we do with the NDIS and hopefully continue to develop positively. Final question for each of you, which I'll let each of you give some thoughts on. What's your best example of, other than the examples you've given today, what's your best example of what you've seen about inclusion, or what do you wish would happen next with regards to inclusion? What's one innovation that you would love to see? Let's go to Julia first.
The best example, we had this question given to us before, and I really struggled to come up with an answer because I think the people who most see the ability and disabilities are the disabled people. Like, if you have a disabled-led organisation, which I'm proud to say Powerchesports Victoria is, you will, employ other disabled people. But also I want to speak to probably one of the best things that I think I've seen happen in recent years was Dylan Alcott being on the now defunct footy show. Just that visibility of disability in media, but not only that, he was there as a sports fan, not as a disabled person. So the rise of him and Kurt Fernley in the media has been amazing to start getting representation out there. I'm just a little sad it's not as diverse, as in it's basically white male cis sport players at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, the concept of ambassadors and diverse ambassadors, I think, is going to become more and more important moving forward. Francis, your thoughts on that final question? What are the best examples you've seen, or what would you like to see come along next, perhaps?
I think for me it is those disability-led peer support models that are best practice in my view, and I work closely with those groups like Valid, for instance. And so, you know, one of the examples of some work that they've undertaken is that Mainstream and Me project that they undertook, which was people with a disability working as community development workers and citizen leaders in their local communities, educating their local communities about inclusive practices and accessible environments and leading social change initiatives. And, you know, I've seen significant shifts in the community's thinking as a result of that work.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank you both, and David in his absence, for being a part of our panel today. I think we can happily say we see your hearts and we hear your minds, that's for sure.